Okay, so Sarah, welcome to the Borders Book Festival and welcome to Bloom Media.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And can you start by just telling people who don't know maybe, what is Craftivism?
Well, it's still quite niche, so there's lots of people who don't know what it is. So it's, in a simple way, it's the word activism and craft mushed together, that's Craftivism. So it was coined in 2003 by an American lady called Betsy Greer, who's a knitter and joined knitting groups and was like, this is more than just craft. People are mending, people are talking about politics and personal issues. So came up with the phrase Craftivism. But I always say it's a bit like the word punk. You've got all these different bands who sound completely different and different artists, but they're under that umbrella. And Craftivism, there's lots of different approaches. So I call my approach gentle protest.
Amazing. And when did you sort of get into this? How did you come to realise that crafts can catalyse change?
Yeah, all by accident, and it was very specific. It was on a train from London to Glasgow in the summer of 2008, and I was working for the UK Department for International Development on social change and mobilising, and I was an activist in lots of activist groups outside of my work, and I was doubting the effectiveness of some of the more divisive, extrovert, simplistic forms of activism and collectivism and activism. And I knew on this Pendolino train for 5.5 hours that I couldn't write my reports and do my emails. So I weirdly just picked up a little cross-stitch kit of a teddy, not really knowing what to do with it, but I wanted to do something with my hands. And then I noticed it calmed me down, slowed me down, and actually it helped me grapple with the uncomfortable questions of, do I believe in my work? Do I believe in activism? Can I be an activist? I keep burning out. And because I had the comfort of doing this cross-stitching, I could really delve into the question without going in a downward spiral. And then the people opposite me asked me what I was doing. And because my background's in activism from the age of 3, I had in my head, and I didn't tell them this, Bethany, but I thought, if only I was cross-stitching a quote by Gandhi about inequality, we could talk about it. And it made me think, I think craft could be useful for the process for critical thinking. And then I started making little mini, got a little pile of little things here. So the first thing I started doing with these little mini protest banners that you just hang up below eye level, somewhere relevant to the issue for people to look and find out more info. So I googled craft and activism, and the word existed, but there wasn't any groups or projects. And Betsy Greer says anyone can use the term. So I started coming up with little projects. Yeah. So it happened very organically, but in my head it was common sense of, this isn't to replace other forms of activism, but it could be useful, also particularly for introverts, for anxious people who might be housebound. Yeah, it all happened by accident.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, especially with your background in activism, I think there's a lot of pressure for activism to be really loud and proud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was sort of going to ask you if you see craftivism as a counter to that, or a criticism of that, or do you see it as something that these two different approaches can coexist?
Yeah, I mean, brilliant question, because I always say I really think we should see craftivism as one tool in the activism toolkit. It's not to replace other forms. I still go on marches if I think the march has got a clear message and it's about policy, not personalities and all of that stuff. I still sign petitions. I still meet with my local MP and lobby them. I still boycott some shops, but then I'll buy shares in other shops to be a shareholder activist. I think we need all of it, but where I think craft can be most useful is in activism is for the process for critical thinking, whether you're on your own or in a group. So I'm doing some workshops this weekend with people to help them grapple with how to be strategic and channel their anger and sadness into something proactive rather than reactive. But also because craft, I do it very kitsch. It's purposefully not red and black and angry and loud. It's small rather than large. It's intriguing rather than preaching. I think that is often a gap in activism, and I saw how craft could really help fill those gaps. So it isn't to replace other forms. It is going actually to hand make a handkerchief for your local politician to say, don't blow it, use your power for good. I know you've got a really difficult job and a really impressive job, and I want this hanky to encourage you to do the best that you can to help people and planet. It's something that shocks them, and I have a neuroscientist in the new book who writes all of the neuroscience for each project. So by giving these gifts to politicians and board members, it creates dopamine in them, which means they're more likely to listen to you than if you throw a milkshake at them or scream at them. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't have people doing loud demonstrations, but I think we need to have every sort of angle covered. And for me, craftivism can be big giant banners, but where I see it filling gaps in activism is giving bespoke, gentle gifts to power holders to hold them responsible and encourage them, doing small bits of street art that go viral online and get people thinking without them feeling attacked, or making yourself something to remind you to practice and not just preach, but also sort of gently protest yourself of, am I, within the limitations I've got, am I living out my values so that people, so I'm a role model for everyone else, and so I can be part of that change I want to see in the world. And I think craft can be really powerful to help fill in those gaps in activism.
Yeah, absolutely. And what kind of response have you had from these sort of higher up people, from these politicians? Has anybody been dismissive, or is it usually a good response?
It's a real mix. I mean, I've been doing it since 2008. I wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work. You can never guarantee activism working. But I created the 20 project book with the neuroscientist and lots of voices from craftivists around the world saying how it's helped some of them change their own hearts and minds or their behaviours. It's changed a lot of the culture of what activism can be. I did a TED talk called Activism Needs Introverts that's had over 1 million views and really helped the charity sector here and abroad say, oh, let's make sure that we also do stuff for introverts. And we have changed. We had WWF, not the wrestling, the World Wildlife Fund, use my 10-point manifesto to create their own craftivism project in Spain that led to a law being changed to protect migrating birds. So it's worked for them. We helped get Marks and Spencer's directly through a craftivism project for a year to pay the living wage to 50,000 staff. And they told us directly, your question about power holders' response, we were making gifts for the board members. Some of them totally didn't like it, didn't get it, didn't engage with us. Some of them did. So for a year, we made them Christmas cards, Valentine's cards, nudged them a bit more. And the chair of the board told me at the following AGM, so a year after we gave them our handkerchief gifts, that it was the most powerful campaign they'd experienced because it was so respectful. We had a really robust argument saying why they could pay the living wage, and we're shocked that they don't because it makes business sense as well as ethical sense. And he didn't have to tell me in person, but he took me aside and said, we just kept talking about our handkerchiefs. Every time we met, someone would say, what was on yours? Where have you put yours? Well, they've got quite a good argument, you know, should we discuss it? So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But even when it doesn't, with local politicians or local business people, that's still really useful intel as an activist to know whether to keep protesting or find someone else. And we've got case studies in the book of people who've used it on local issues, national issues, and won campaigns and changed local policies. So if it didn't work, I wouldn't do it. I'd do another form of activism.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've mentioned the handkerchiefs a lot, but is there one particular campaign that you think has been the most effective?
Oh, well, they're all my babies and they all have completely different objectives. So the handkerchief one is a nice, straightforward, sort of clean campaign of start to finish, and we won, which is very unusual. But I love the mini scrolls project, which is sort of the opposite as well. So it's these little mini fashion statements, and you shop drop them. So it's the opposite of shoplifting. You put one, not more than one, in a pocket of a shop, an item item of clothing in a shop that you think could be more ethical. If you don't want to do that, you can put it in a family or family's pocket or friends or in your school or somewhere. And it says, please open me. You can see with the little... Don't open it though, this is my sample for the events tonight. But it's to support Fashion Revolution. So again, looking at the gaps in the activism toolkit, I thought Fashion Revolution came out of the Rana Plaza disaster where over 1,000 people were killed in Bangladesh in a factory sweatshop. And it was created by 2 fashion designers saying, we love fashion, but we don't like this awful side of the industry. And I wanted to support them because it wasn't divisive and it wasn't saying don't buy in all these shops and all fashion is awful. I love fashion. Most of my collective, which is thousands of people around the world, also love fashion. So we thought if we make intriguing little mini scrolls that you handwrite one of 3 messages we've crafted, so you pick which one's relevant to you, You write it in your neatest handwriting, and it's messages like, what's the story behind this item of clothing? Is it one of joy? Is it one of pain? Find out more at Fashion Revolution so you can see how you can be part of the solution. But that project was about reaching fashion media who would never normally cover the ugly side of the fashion industry. So we got on one of the most influential fashion websites in the world called Business of Fashion. We got it on the homepage of the BBC News website. We have people in fashion weeks take part and get national and international coverage about it every year. So that's very different sort of results to we've changed a policy or a law. It was much more about how can we change shoppers' thoughts, how can we get into big media, and how can we channel people to support Fashion Revolution and take part with them. And I've had craftivists say in the book, I have a lovely quote from Emily Stone, who said that she's kept one of her mini scrolls she made in the bottom of her bag. So every time she goes shopping and finds a nice item of clothing she likes, she has to look in her bag to get her wallet, and she can see the scroll and go, do I actually need that item of clothing? Or can I find out its ethical credentials? So they're like very polar opposites of sort of examples of craftivism, but very useful in completely different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of making people think a bit more consciously about their actions.
And we've got gentle protest fonts to use, gentle protest language to use, what colours to use, like all of those things is me honing my craft in craftivism and then saying to readers and groups around the world, I've tested out all this stuff, I've tweaked it and seen where it can be useful. Now you can have a go as well. And then use the book as training grounds to maybe create your own campaign if you want to at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you said they're all kind of your babies. It's sort of like asking you to pick your favourite child. But is there one, like a particular campaign that's maybe close to your heart or has felt a bit more personal for you?
It changes quite often, really. I think one of the workshops I'm doing this weekend is wearing your green heart on your sleeve. So you stitch what you love and you wear it here or on your wrist. And I've got eco-anxiety, like a lot of people, and you write something that you love in the world. So I've got bluebells, but it could be grandchildren, grandparents, something tangible to say global warming affects everything. But you wear it to intrigue people to say, is that handmade? And why is it green? And why is it on your arm? And it just gives you a chance to say, I love this and I'm going to work my hardest to protect it. What do you love? But we've had Christina Figueres wear one, who's one of my sheroes. We have a local councillor who made her own, say, in Walthamstow, which is her constituency, and she wears it at every council meeting she goes to, whether it's online or in person, so that when people say, what's that on your arm, which people always do, it gives her an excuse to say, I'm really worried about global warming, the future of my kids and everyone else's. And so everything we look at, whether it's housing or potholes, we need to think about this through the lens of climate. And I love how there's people all around the world who wear their green heart on their sleeve, and it helps in different ways, in different contexts. And I think for me at the moment, I sort of cling to that as I'm doing something useful. It helps me with my eco-anxiety. I know it helps others. And then seeing the ripple effects. We've got collage pages in the book where it shows Kizzy, who's the councillor in Walthamstow, her story, people all over the world of different backgrounds and ages and genders saying how it's helped them. And that keeps me going at the moment. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And you've mentioned a few people there, but you've had some amazing people speak about how incredible this craftivism can be. Yeah. Is there one person that kind of stands out as you thought, okay, I'm onto something here, I'm doing something right if this person is acknowledging it?
I've never been asked that. I love that question. Well, I did an event 2 weeks ago with Helen Pankhurst of the Pankhurst dynasty in Manchester, which was we filmed it for YouTube, so it goes up soon. I think having her endorse the book, and she's endorsed it on the back, we got lots of endorsements throughout the book, that kept me going because she's an incredible activist in her own right, and obviously from that dynasty. So when she started supporting me a few years ago with my last book, we met at Hay Festival, I think. I thought, well, if she thinks it's good, maybe I'll keep going. And she's been quite a good mentor. But I always have good critics around me, and because I worked in the charity sector and Oxfam and Christian Aid and different NGOs, and I still work a lot with them, I always pick tough critics who are heads of campaigns and policy workers to say, what do you think about this? Is there anything I could tweak on this? Is this robust? Is there a risk that this could be misunderstood? So I sort of surround myself with people who will be honest. And my mum's a politician, which helps as well, so I can put myself in her shoes if we're targeting politicians. And so I think at the moment Helen Pankhurst endorsing the book and saying the work is needed keeps me going.
Yeah, that's amazing. And you've spoken a little bit in the book about using social media for activism, and I wanted to bring this up because it's a very tricky thing.
So tricky.
I've definitely struggled with it before, of having sort of everything that you do gets claimed to be performative.
Yes.
Or you're not speaking enough, or you're speaking too much.
And I've had that very recently.
Yeah,
yes.
So what would your sort of top tips be for people on how to use social media effectively for activism?
Yeah, so I've got an amazing contributor in the book, Nina Dyer, who's a social media expert, so she's given some top tips. I'm really struggling at the moment because when I started doing Craftivism, Instagram didn't exist, Pinterest didn't exist, and it was still images, it was more about blogs than vlogs. And that's how my brain works. My brain works more with stills and the written word, which is why I do books. I don't like the short, fast videos. My worry with them as well is they can be oversimplified, or they can look insensitive sometimes, particularly on TikTok, I think, as well. But that is changing. But I also don't like, I'm happy to talk to you on camera, but I'm not great at talking to a screen. So I'm really, I've got big questions just for me personally at the moment of how to navigate social media and the companies that own the platforms we're using and the ethics around it. And really that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, was if it's too much for me, you've got the book, you've got all the content. We were recently hacked on Instagram, so over a decade's worth disappeared to our 29,000 followers, can't see it all now. So I think my advice is less is more, quality not quantity. Sometimes social media isn't the right format. I do much more podcast interviews now, so I can talk more nuanced. People can hear my tone of voice, hear that hopefully it's not performative, it's humble, it's strategic, and not take stuff out of context. I don't do as much mainstream media broadsheets where they just want something divisive, where they can want activists to fight against each other. I sort of pick and choose, and I limit how much I'm on social media. So that probably might be a surprise answer, but I think more and more I'm getting nervous of social media, and I'm seeing more negatives than positives, which is really sad to say, and I'm still navigating what the answer is of how to use it ethically and effectively, but also maybe do more newsletters. I've just filmed 4 events for YouTube so people can watch them as long forms, or I can cut them up shorter without people taking them out of context. But I think it's far more polarising now than it ever has been, and I think we need to have these conversations about what's healthy for us personally, what's healthy for our audiences, what's honest and what's performative and what's privileged. You know, I'm a white woman that lives in London, but I'm from Everton. There's lots of complexities there that I need to always think about, and my own unconscious bias I'm trying to work through. So there's a lot to think about. But I also want people to know to not do anything and try and be perfect. But if you do stuff, what I love about craft as well is it's hand done. I learned to craft from YouTube. I always say if it's perfect, people might think you're doing it for the love of craft, not activism, not to serve the cause. So the fact that there's imperfections makes it more endearing, makes it more vulnerable, and actually strengthens your campaign. And all of our messages are often questions rather than statements. They're not absolutist, they're not binary and black and white. They're there to create conversation with nuance and go beyond the binary. And I think that's where craft can be really useful, is you learn from doing, you make mistakes, and those mistakes can be really powerful, and it's more disarming really than divisive. I could talk for hours, but I
think we are out of time.
But
I was going to ask you finally, what are you most excited about for this weekend?
I'm really excited about doing my In Conversation with David, because I think that will be good. I know he's going to ask some tough questions, which I love. And then just seeing who comes to the workshops. I'm doing 2 workshops, our dream making project, which is all about using your prefrontal cortex and not be on fight, flight or freeze mode, and the heart on your sleeve. And I always get really diverse audiences from different political persuasions and ages and backgrounds. And I just love facilitating, but more listening into people's conversations. And we have craft to thought questions with every project, so I get people to discuss them or reflect on them. So I'd love to just, listen into people's thoughts and conversations and help them hopefully see that craftivism can be one tool in their activism toolkit.
Amazing. Thanks so much for speaking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
And good luck for the weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.